Okay, so a couple things before we get started. First off, you should have all seen the feedback by now that I left on your proposals. Like, on the whole, really ambitious proposals. And while like that's good, like it's good that y'all want to try to tackle big questions, but you've also got to think about what you can actually accomplish in 4 to 5 pages with no secondary sources, right? So the one piece of advice I will give to all of you is kind of scale that back a little bit. Because I think you are all biting off a little bit more than you can chew. But yeah, I'm happy to talk through that. Like if you need a little help doing that, just kind of narrowing things down or coming up with something smaller, I'm happy to help you with that, right? And you know, so are the good people at the Writing Center. The other thing that I did want to talk a little bit about today is the presentation that y'all are going to have to do in the second half of the semester. Now, because there are only 3 of you and y'all are awesome, I'm going to give you 2 possible ways to do this, right? You could do this, we could do 3 solo presentations where you are each responsible for your own thing and your own topic and doing your own research and coming up with everything on your own. Some people prefer working that way. Or the 3 of you could do a group presentation together. Now, the caveat is going to be that if you are going to do a group presentation together, it's going to be a little longer and it's going to have a couple more sources, right? So we'll say you'll need 3 sources and it'll be 20 minutes if you do it yourself. It'll require 5 sources and it'll be 30 minutes if you do it as a group. So which would y'all prefer to do? And you can confer amongst yourselves.
I don't care, whatever y'all want to do.
I don't know, I tend to like to work by myself.
Okay.
Okay, so you'd rather do solo presentations?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So I will get the directions for that to you after midterm. But okay, so at least now we know what we're doing. Okay. The other thing, somebody asked me a question about how to set up your works cited page for this paper. So we'll do that. So remember that you're going to be citing the specific text that you're working with, not the entirety of the anthology, right? So it's going to look something like this. Say you were writing on Carlyle. None of you are. I'm not surprised none of you are, but so we start with author name, the name of the excerpts, the name of the anthology, which edition. This is the 10th edition. The names of the editor or editors. The publisher. Year, this was 2018. This is almost 4 years old, and let's stick us with the new editions in. And page numbers. So yeah, your citation will look like this with whichever text you are actually using. So any questions? Okay, I'll give you a minute to copy this down.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, this is going to be the easiest part of today. I mean that for both of us. Carlyle's not easy for anybody. Everybody good? All right. So what did y'all think of Sartor Resartus, or the excerpt from Sartor Resartus that you read?
It's pretty depressing.
Okay. What was depressing about it?
I think it was just so sad because it seemed like the professor in it had had so many hardships in life, and like because of all that they lost their faith, and like then they didn't know what to do, and they were just like struggling. It was like a battle between
Right. But then you find something else, right, to kind of fill that void. And I think, yeah, the big point of Carlyle is the nature of that something else, right? So Carlyle, in this book, is propounding what he calls a philosophy of clothes. In which clothes are a metaphor for human institutions. So let's try to pick apart how this basic metaphor works, right? So what do your clothes do for you?
They cover our bodies.
Yeah, okay, they cover our bodies. To what end? Why do we need something to cover us?
Because we're naked.
That's what he says in the book.
Okay. but like think about like what that means, right? If you're naked, what else are you?
Vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. You're vulnerable. You're defenseless, right? So our clothes not only, kind of like present our outward appearance to the world, they also protect us from, both, shame and embarrassment, and also from the elements, right? Now, what happens to your clothes as they age?
They tear and wear down.
Yeah, you can kind of see that happen to the cuffs on my jeans here, right? It's the longer you keep wearing the same clothes, the more they're going to wear out, right? And you can only keep stitching and patching them together for so long, right? Before you just have to give up and just shell out the money for a new pair of pants already, right? So, for Carlyle, human institutions work pretty much the same way. Right? We come up with these institutions, whether they're governments, religions, whatever, to serve us and protect us from some particular vulnerability, right? But over time, as society changes, if these institutions don't change, they start to wear out and they need to be replaced, right? So Carlyle is writing at a time, when he is thinking that conventional Christian religion has reached this point and no longer provides for the masses the same kind of protection and the same kind of meaning in life that it once did. So he's proposing to replace it with something else that I can't recall if he himself ever used this phrase, but his followers certainly did. A gospel of labor. And basically what this means, right, for Carlyle, is that if you feel your life lacks meaning, right, if you feel there's a great big hole inside of you, where faith in religion or faith in government or faith in some other institution used to be, the way you fill that hole is with work. Right? You find what work you are best suited to and throw yourself into it. This actually kind of sounds like it would be appealing to certain tech CEOs today as well, right? It's like, well, if you feel unfulfilled, you're just not working hard enough. And for Carlyle too, it's not like you should just do anything, right? It's not like if you feel empty, you should just go out and start digging ditches, right? Now, if digging ditches turns out to be the thing you're best at and the thing that makes you happy and feel fulfilled, then by all means go do that. But yeah, it's about finding the work that best fits your talents and your particular spiritual and intellectual needs, right? And this becomes an enormously influential idea in the mid to late 19th century, right? So Carlyle is writing this particular book between 1830 and 1834. So it's actually, it's in the Victorian volume here. It's actually slightly pre-Victorian, right? So Victoria takes the throne in 1835. And Carlyle is born in the same year as Keats, right? So they are actually exact contemporaries. It's just that, Carlyle lives past the age of 25. And it's kind of like, it's interesting to wonder if we would consider Keats a Victorian rather than a romantic if he lived longer. But I digress. So, this was the reason also that I was playing this particular piece of music at the beginning of class. Do any of you know who Prometheus was? And silence.
I remember seeing it in the footnotes.
Okay.
But I can't recall it.
So, in Greek mythology, Prometheus is the Titan who steals fire from the gods and brings it to human beings, and is then, punished by Zeus by being, chained to a mountain in hell and having an eagle come and tear out his liver every day. And because Prometheus is a divine being, the liver just grows back, which makes the torture even worse because the eagle can just keep coming back and taking his liver, right? But Prometheus kind of becomes a figure for the daring inventor and tireless worker, right? Who wants to bring enlightenment into the dark corners of the world and damn the consequences. So, what else did y'all get out of this? Is there anything else that you feel you actually understood here or were able to extract from this?
I like the idea when he said, like, when they're killed in war, they become one with the earth almost. Like, it's feeding the earth. Like, it's, that was a
Yeah, that even human stupidity can't stop natural productivity, right? Let's actually let's go there because I think this is actually a really important set of passages. There are two passages together that I want us to look at. They're in the Center of Indifference section. And the first is on page 41. And Peyton, since you brought this to our attention, can you start reading from Horrible Enough?
Horrible enough, a whole march fell strewed with shell splinters, cannon shot, ruined tumbrils, and dead men and horses. Stragglers still remaining not so much as buried. And those red mold heaps, there lie the shells of men, out of which all the life and virtue has been blown. And now are they swept together and crammed down out of sight, like blown eggshells. Did nature, when she bade the
Donau. It's a river, yeah.
Okay, bring down his mold cargoes from the Corinthian and Carpathian heights, and spread them out here into the softest, richest level, and tend thee, O Marchfeld, for the corn-bearing nursery, whereon her children might be nursed, or for a cockpit wherein they might the more commodiously be throttled.
Okay, thank you. We can pause there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's at this point, Teufelsdruck is looking out over a battlefield, right? Where one of the important battles, the Battle of Wagram, in the Napoleonic Wars, was fought. There's a lot of reference in here to the Napoleonic Wars. So what he's doing, right, is kind of juxtaposing the idea of battlefield with the notion of, I'm trying to like battlefield versus farm almost, right? Right? Did nature intend for this to be a place where human beings blow the lives out of each other and then just leave the wreckage strewn all over the place? Or for a place that actually sustained and nurtured life? Right, for, a fertile place for growing food. And Carlyle's answer is, of course, the latter. Right? I think we can discern a kind of general attitude towards war over the course of these two pages. Now, can I get somebody to read for us down at the bottom of the page from Nevertheless, Nature is at Work?
Okay. Nevertheless, nature is at work. Neither shall these coddled devilkins with their utmost devilry gainsay her, but all that gore and carnage will be shrouded in, absorbed into manure, and next year the March fell will be green, nay greener. Thrifty, unwearied nature Ever out of our great ways, adducing some little profit of thy own, how dost thou, from the very carcass of the killer, bring life for the living?
So yeah, so can human beings, according to Carlyle, actually disrupt nature's work with all of their viciousness and killing and nasty machines?
No.
Because nature's just going to absorb what we do anyway. Right now, we know now that scientifically that's not really true, right? That actually we can do more or less irreparable damage to the planet. But Carlyle here is arguing that yeah, nature will take our waste products and recycle them into, basically food, right? Now, we also see this logic applied to human beings. What, speaking in quite an official language, is the net purport and upshot of war? To my own knowledge, for example, there dwell and toil in the British village of Dumdrudge, usually some 500 souls. From these, by certain natural enemies of the French, there are successively selected, during the French War, say, 30 able-bodied men. Dumdrudge, at her own expense, has suckled and nursed them. She has not without difficulty and sorrow fed them up to manhood, and even trained them to crafts, so that one can weave, another build, another hammer, and the weakest can stand under 30 stone avoirdupois. Basically, it means he can hold up about 400 pounds. Nevertheless, amid much weeping and swearing, they are selected, all dressed in red, and shipped away at the public charges some 2,000 miles, or say only to the south of Spain, and fed there till wanted. And now to that same spot, in the south of Spain, are 30 similar French artisans, from a French Dumdrudge, in like manner wending, till at length, after infinite effort, the two parties come into actual juxtaposition, and 30 stands fronting 30, each with a gun in his hand. Straightway the word fire is given, and they blow the souls out of one another. And in place of 60 brisk, useful craftsmen, the world has 60 dead carcasses, which it must bury and anew shed tears for. Had these men any quarrel? Busy as the devil is, not the smallest. They lived far enough apart, were the entire strangers, nay, in so wide a universe there was even unconsciously, by commerce, some mutual helpfulness between them. How then? Simpleton. Their governors had fallen out, and instead of shooting one another, had the cunning to make these poor blockheads shoot. So there are two things I want to kind of pull out of this. First off, do you notice anything about Carlyle's style? About his sentence structures, the kinds of sentences he uses?
He has a lot of leading questions, and then he immediately answers them.
Yeah, he's real big on rhetorical questions that he then provides an answer to, right? A lot of exclamations as well, right? Anything else you notice about his style?
A lot of sarcasm.
Okay, yes. A lot of sarcasm and irony, yes. And a lot of these kind of long, long sentences with multiple clauses, right? Does his style remind you of anything?
The Gothic a little bit.
Okay, why the Gothic theme?
It's just very intense in the way he's describing them fighting each other.
Okay. There is actually a specific source for Carlyle's rhetoric. So Carlyle actually trained as a minister before losing his religious faith as a very young man. So much of his style, particularly when it's Teufelsdruck talking and not the editor, right? We've got these two separate voices here. But Teufelsdruck's voice is very much kind of the voice of a preacher. And so he often talks in the style of a sermon. Hence all the rhetorical questions and the exclamations, right, and the sort of little side digressions. So yeah, Teufelsdruck talks like a preacher. But what else do we notice about this passage about this village of Dumdrudge? Where does Carlyle locate the cause of war?
Since it's in the governors, not the people themselves.
Yeah. It's people sitting in offices back at the Capitol, right, who have an argument with each other and get these other guys in the way, right, and in between themselves, and get them to fight instead of actually having it out with one another, right? So it's something that's kind of started by people who don't have to finish it, right? What else does he seem to, what other kind of values can we pull out of this? What else does he seem to think about war? What else does he think is particularly problematic about war? What do we have in Dumdrudge before these 30 guys go off to fight?
I like the synergy, like they're helping each other actually, like with the commerce between the other.
Okay. Yeah. So these two villages actually probably don't know it, right? This English village and this French village.
Right.
They don't know each other.
Right.
They probably don't realize that they're connected through trade, but they are, right? But in each of these villages, right, you had 30 guys with a useful trade who could be making some kind of working contribution to society. But instead, they've been sent by their governments to a battlefield to slaughter each other. So what does that tell us Carlyle thinks war ultimately is?
Useless, unprofitable for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's wasteful, right? That's his biggest objection here is that it's wasteful. Right? It's a waste of land that gets trampled down by carts, by draft animals, by marching feet, right? And then gets strewn with corpses and empty cartridge shells. And it's a waste of human beings as well. You have these useful tradesmen who could be doing something constructive at home. But instead, they're dead in a field in Europe. So, there is a kind of line of influence that stretches through contemporary philosophical trends. And actually, if you just excuse me for just a second. My allergies are killing me today. It's becoming distracting. Okay, so I believe I was about to introduce to you an idea called utilitarianism. Have any of you ever heard of this before? Okay, Kaylee, what's utilitarianism?
I remember the term. I can't remember anything about it, but I know I have heard about it before.
Okay. And so utilitarianism is it's a philosophy that emerges at the end of the 18th century, particularly in the work of people like Jeremy Bentham and James Mill. And one thing to note before I really get into a deep description of it is that Carlyle is ambivalent about it, right? It's probably the most influential philosophical idea of the 19th century, but Carlyle, on the one hand, mocks it, right? It's what he calls profit and loss philosophy. In the early part of the excerpt that you read. But it also really kind of informs this whole gospel of labor idea, right? So if we look for a definition of utilitarianism, what's the obvious root word?
Utility.
Utility, good, yes. And what does utility mean?
Resource, something to be used.
Okay, yeah, it's a resource, yeah, it's something to be used, right? So yeah, the word utility refers to usefulness. And this is the central tenet of utilitarianism, right? That an idea should be judged by its usefulness. But the utilitarians had a very specific definition of usefulness. An idea that was useful, particularly according to Bentham, is an idea that either increases pleasure or decreases pain for the greatest number of people. And he actually believed that you could kind of calculate this mathematically, right? That you could figure out with a formula that he called the hedonic calculus the extent to which any particular action would increase pleasure for the most people or decrease pain for the most people, right? So the basic view of human nature that people like Bentham and Mill had is that we're motivated by two things. Right? You can basically boil our motivations down to two base level things. First, desire for pleasure. We want things that make us happier, that make us feel good. And the second, fear of pain. We shy away from things that we think are going to harm us, right? Or going to cause us pain or distress. And Carlyle sums up this philosophy in the first part of the reading here by calling it the belief that soul is synonymous with stomach. Now let's just think about that statement there, and let's just try to break it down. Soul is synonymous with stomach. What does that mean? What is he accusing the utilitarians of believing? Or what is he accusing them of not believing? If they think soul is synonymous with stomach.
it mean like soul is still connected with physicality?
I think you're on the right track there, I think. Yeah, it's maybe not so much connected with as like think about like what are synonyms?
Or does it mean the same thing?
Words that mean the same thing, right? So if soul and stomach are synonymous, are they just connected? If they're synonymous, it means they're identical, right? So what Carlyle is accusing utilitarians of believing is that human beings are simply kind of grossly material creatures with grossly material motivations, and that there's nothing animates us beyond our material wants and fears, right? That everything about us can be reduced to physicality. As long as our bellies are full, we're happy. And I think Carlyle, like this is where Carlyle's big kind of departure from utilitarian thought is, right? Is that he wants people to be useful, right? But he takes this idea of useful work and makes it into a kind of spiritual practice, right? Instead of being merely a way to provide for your material needs, it becomes something that fills the hole where religious faith used to be. Does this make sense? Everybody still with me? Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this so far?
Oh, you said that he was that Carlyle ambivalent on this topic of utilitarianism. So he mocks it in the way that he said, by saying like soul is synonymous with stomach. So what way does he find it is useful?
Well, he's still taking this idea of useful work, or that like human beings have to be useful to find meaning from utilitarian thought. So he's just kind of taking that and applying it differently, right? That instead of regarding human beings as basically nothing but like flesh and blood machines, like the utilitarians do, like he's suggesting that we need work to fulfill our spiritual selves. Does this make sense? And yeah, utilitarianism it's kind of useful for him as as a foil, right? Something to react against and also kind of develop a little bit. But yeah, when we look at some of the Industrial Revolution nonfiction writing that we're going to look at next time, utilitarianism is going to be all over some of that stuff, right? Okay, so it's probably also worth noting that Carlyle is living at like the tail end. He's writing this at the tail end of a long series of political, social, and economic revolutions in Britain. Right? So, first, the political revolutions. Right? We had the American Revolution. Between 1776 and 1780. Two French revolutions. The first from 1789 to 1799, and then again in 1830, as he's putting Sartor Resartus together. And a rising in Ireland in 1798, all of which had been inspired to some extent by Enlightenment philosophy. Right, so these guys are reading Voltaire, they're reading Rousseau, they're reading Immanuel Kant, and it's, kind of redefining the relationship between the individual and the state, right? So we're seeing a great deal of political questioning, particularly outside of England itself, in the period. There are also two enormous economic revolutions at the end of the 18th century. First, there's an agricultural revolution. So, at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th centuries, agricultural output in Britain explodes as the population also grows. However, the rural share of the population begins shrinking rapidly. So you've got land that's becoming more productive, but with fewer people on it. And this was due in part to a series of technological improvements. So you improved plows, you had inventions like the seed drill that allowed you to, that made sure that more of your crops would actually would make it to germination. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a seed drill before. You kind of drag it along in the back of a cart and it kind of pounds the seeds into the ground a little deeper, so that fewer of them get, say, taken by crows. You also had the beginning of practices like crop rotation. So you kept the soil fertile by not planting the same crop there over and over again, and by letting a field lie fallow maybe for a season. And railroads also began creating a national market for agricultural goods. Right? You no longer had to just kind of load up all of your corn and cheese on a cart and take it to the nearest market town. You could actually ship it across the nation on railroads. So this also led to a series of social changes. I think we may have already discussed the Enclosure Acts at the end of the 18th century. But yeah, as landlords realized that breeding livestock and growing doing large-scale growing would be more profitable than, say, having a village in a particular place, they started enclosing village greens and using them for private farming practices rather than as public lands. This encouraged a lot of people to move off of public lands and or to move out of rural areas and into cities. This also led to an increase in farm size. Basically, small tenant farmers went out of business, and agriculture became dominated by large landlords. And the removal of tariffs on agricultural goods, that is, special taxes on them, special import taxes, led to a kind of free market for British agricultural goods as well, so it circulated more widely. and large farmers would make more money. So the things that Carlyle is responding to here in particular are these workers from rural areas coming to cities looking for something to do, right? You've got vast swaths of the rural population now that are basically put out of work by these new processes. You simply don't need as many people to run a farm anymore due to technological improvements. And so you've got a lot of people running around looking for meaning, and the traditional means of helping those people, whether it's parish relief through the churches or government relief, it's not really making much of a dent. So there's a sense that this broader system is breaking down, is failing, right? So were there any other parts of this that y'all had questions about or wanted to discuss before I move on with other stuff here? Were y'all able to grasp here, by the way, that there are two people talking here? There are two voices in this. Okay, do y'all know who the two voices are supposed to be?
It wasn't the long name that I cannot pronounce. And was it the professor?
Well, the professor is
It is the long name.
Diogenes Teufelsdruck.
Okay.
He's an obscure professor of philosophy. And he's the philosophy of clothes guy, right? And Teufelsdruck is apparently missing or dead. And the basic situation that the whole novel presents is that he's left all of his papers, he's left his whole manuscript in a set of paper bags on this editor's doorstep. And so this editor is trying to sort through this manuscript and construct something coherent out of it. So he's got this thing that's just been kind of given to him in no particular order. He's trying to stitch it together. So the process of reading this is supposed to be like the process of stitching for yourself that new philosophy, that new suit of clothes, right? Because you are following along with the editors. He's trying to see which pieces are supposed to fit where and where the connective tissue is and all that sort of thing, right? So it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to audiences in 1833 either. But it still enjoyed an enormous influence. In fact, Sartor Resartus in Latin means the tailor retailored. So anything else that y'all? Yeah, go ahead.
It makes sense when you said that Carlyle was originally trained as a minister. Did you say that?
Yeah.
For some reason, it seemed like it reminded me of the book of Job.
Okay.
He was all the lamentations he was doing. He was talking about his faith. It just reminded me of the book of Job. And all the questioning, after Job lost his kids and everything in his livelihood, it just seemed like He had to shave his head and put on sackcloth. That's what it seemed like.
Yeah. And God just shows up in a cloud and says, "Who are you to question me?" Right?
Well, it is interesting how many different sections of scripture were put in there. And as I was reading this, I was like, this was someone who knew the Bible.
Absolutely,
They pulled out things from like Genesis and Exodus with the pillar of fire and the cloud and like all this stuff, like God leading the Israelites by day and night, and then him almost seeming like, but where is God now? Like, I don't feel his presence, I don't know. And like, I feel like that combined with a lot of like the hard circumstances he had was what like caused him to doubt, which is so much of what you hear other people struggling with today, like in their own faith or lack thereof.
And I think you're absolutely. This is just littered with references to Scripture, and I think one of the ways we might think about this too is that because this doesn't end on a negative, right? Or at least Teufelsdruck seems to regard where he gets to, but then he gets the everlasting yea, as a positive, right? Kind of moved to a new philosophical understanding, but it's a philosophical understanding that is stitched together out of all of this other stuff that he knows, right? So he's taking, in addition to these, various scraps of scripture, right? He's taking it, he's stitching it together with utilitarian philosophy and with romantic poetry, right? And all of these other influences to create something different, right? He's going to kind of build a new coat that fits him better, if that makes sense. And I think the romantic poetry thing, there is actually a strong romantic influence in this as well, particularly in that everlasting no section. So we didn't really end up getting to talk much about this with the mortal immortal because we just kind of ran out of time talking about other stuff. But there is actually, I think, and Peyton, you were mentioning the Gothic earlier. There is a direct line of descent from the male Gothic to Teufelsdruck. Somebody remind me what distinguished the male Gothic from the female Gothic.
The main character was usually like an overreacher in his society.
Yes. An overreacher who cannot abide society's rules, right? Now, in the poetry of Lord Byron, who's a member of that second generation of Romantics, he's roughly the same age as Keats, but manages to survive a little longer. This male Gothic overreacher figure becomes like both kind of the central concern, like the central protagonist, particularly of his early poetry, but also like loses any real sense of purpose, right? So like the male Gothic overreacher always wants to do something, right? He has a goal. The so-called Byronic hero doesn't fit into society and won't live by society's rules, but doesn't seem to have much of a goal apart from staring at things and brooding. So Byron writes, Byron's first major work, or the work that really brings him to attention, is a long poem called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. And the poem largely consists of the titular character, going and staring at these sublime vistas and feeling grumpy. And it is like, okay, like there are passages of real beauty and real value in this, but there is something about the whole enterprise that seems a little bit kind of narcissistic and silly. And we see this figure actually parodied in The Mortal Immortal in Whinsey, right? Who is this immortal figure who is brooding over his essential uselessness, right? But there's really nothing left for him to do but brood. And Teufelsdruck, I think, in the Everlasting No section, is very much this kind of character, right? He's angry at the world, he's upset with the world, but he hasn't figured out anything positive to do about it. Right. All that he wants to do is go and be mad at things because of his experiences at the Hinterschlag Gymnasium. And just, I think there might be a footnote that explains this, but this gives you some kind of sense of Carlyle's basic sense of humor, if you hadn't already gotten that from the fact that his protagonist's name means God-born devil shit. Hinterschlag Gymnasium means smack bottom high school. So what is that meant to suggest about the kind of education one gets at Hinterschlag Gymnasium?
It's not very good.
Probably not very good, right? And probably consisting largely of corporal punishment, right?
Mm.
So yeah, so he's had negative experiences at Hinterschlag Gymnasium. The ruddy morning in Hinterschlag Gymnasium is, it's a reference both to the red sunrise, right? But also to the color of Teufelsdruck's ass after a vigorous punishment. And the girl he loved has married someone else, and so he can find no purpose in existence, right? So I think this is kind of like what marks the kind of break here between Romanticism and Victorianism, is that Teufelsdruck doesn't stay in brooding mode. He actually does find some kind of purpose, right? And something to live for in work. But we can also see that there is an intention here to directly reference Byron, because he mentions several times the Satanic. You picked up on that, or you remembered that from previous session. Y'all remember what the Satanic School was?
It was Shelley and I can't remember the other one, but it was just it was the way Southey described their writing.
Yeah, it was Robert Southey called Lord Byron and Percy Shelley and Leigh Hunt. Yeah, because he considered their writing to be very much about individualism and rebellion, right? And so this is the idea that Teufelsdruck ultimately rejects, right? In moving from the everlasting no through the center of indifference to the everlasting yea. And were you able to figure out what these chapter headings meant, what the everlasting no was? I will take your silence to mean no. Okay. All right, so the everlasting no, we're actually given the definition of this at the end of that section on page 39. So can I get somebody to read for us the paragraph that starts with, "Thus had the everlasting no peeled authoritatively through all the recesses of my being."
I will.
All right.
All right. Thus had the everlasting no peeled authoritatively through all the recesses of my being, of my me. And then was it that my whole me stood up in native God created majesty and with emphasis recorded its protest. Such a protest, the most important transaction in life, may that same indignation and defiance in the psychological point of view be fitly called, the everlasting no has said, behold, thou art fatherless, outcast, and the universe is mine, the devil's, to which my whole me now made answer, I am not thine, but free, and forever hate thee.
Okay, thank you. So let's try to unpack this. Like, what is the everlasting no?
It's like his statement of who he thinks he is, regardless of what, like, maybe somebody else would think.
Is he the one speaking the everlasting no?
Oh, no.
Yeah, the everlasting no is something outside of him, right? I was confused the first time I read that too. This took me a while to figure out. and plus a very patient grad school professor.
Is it what's in the sentence before, such a protest, most important transaction in life, the same indignation and defiance, that says it's like fitly called, like is that what he's meaning? Is
Well, he's the one raising the protest, right?
The protest of what? The protest of what? Like others identifying him as? No way.
Well, think of it. What does the everlasting no actually say to him?
It says the universe is the devil's, which is him. And then,
Behold, thou art fatherless, outcast, and the universe is mine, the devil's. So without making the everlasting no like into like a literal devil, what is it?
rejection of religious like idea, or like the way things have always been, possibly.
Okay. I think maybe think about this in terms of this whole Byronic hero thing and what the Byronic hero goes and does. Does the Byronic hero go and do anything positive or constructive? No, he just stares at things and broods, right? And feels like an outcast. And the everlasting no is, I think, that kind of like spirit of negativity, right? This thing that leads you because you feel like society isn't set up for you to simply reject everything, right? And to live only to go around feeling sad about things.
Okay, yeah, it does, like, reading it again, does like a declaration of,
Yeah.
like, isolation, of freeing yourself from,
Yeah, from a kind of self-imposed isolation,
Right.
right? And I think it's interesting, like he has this this revelation at a place in Paris. It's not a real street, it doesn't exist. It's the rue, which means street, St. Thomas, L'Enfer. So L'Enfer, Inferno, Hell. So it's the street of St. Thomas in Hell. Do y'all know who St. Thomas is, or what's significant about St. Thomas? Which of the apostles he was?
Is it Thomas the Doubter?
Yeah, he's the doubter. Right, the guy who needed proof. Had to put his finger in the wounds, right? So he has this revelation on the street of the doubter in hell. And his protest against this everlasting no, right, is, I am not thine, but free, and forever hate thee. So it's a rejection of this pose, this attitude. Which then leads to a period of aimless wandering, right? This center of indifference. Where he's largely kind of indifferent to both life and death, and to all of the individuals that he meets. And then this everlasting yea is where he finally embraces a positive program, right? He embraces this gospel of labor. Right, there's where is the where's the thing I wanted to note? Right on page 46. Temptations in the wilderness, exclaims Teufelsdruck. Have we not all to be tried with such? Not so easily can the old Adam, lodged in us by birth, be dispossessed. Our life is compassed round with necessity. Yet is the meaning of life itself no other than freedom and voluntary force. Thus have we a warfare, in the beginning especially, a hard-fought battle. For the God-given mandate, work thou in well-doing, lies mysteriously written in Promethean prophetic characters in our hearts, and leaves us no rest, night or day, till it be deciphered and obeyed, till it burn forth in our conduct a visible acted gospel of freedom. And as the clay-given mandate, eat thou and be filled, at the same time persuasively proclaims itself through every nerve, must not there be a confusion, a contest, before the better influence can become the upper? So the result of this contest for him has been embracing this philosophy of work thou in well-doing, right? And this is the everlasting yea. And Carlyle's philosophy is something that we're probably going to keep coming back to as we read other Victorian texts, and even some modernist texts. Because, I mean, like this guy just casts a... I don't expect that you enjoyed this very much. This probably wasn't a fun read for you. But, again, like just because this guy's shadow looms so large over the whole period, and this text comes so early in it, it's still worth spending a little bit of time with. So does anybody have any questions before I wrap this up and let y'all go? I should never say that before I wrap this up and let y'all go, because then you're just going to want to go. I should always hold back on that. So if we'll talk more, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, so with rationalism, that's the like the ideology that you only believe in what you see, right? Or what the laws or the universe.
I think so. So rationalism is the idea that the universe operates according to observable, predictable laws.
Correct. And then empiricism
Go ahead.
with what you only like believing in what you can like see.
Yeah, we can only know what we can sense, right?
Okay. But like on like page 37 when he was right here,
There are a lot of words.
yeah, it's a lot of words. Okay, yeah. But for me, so strangely prosperous had I been, the net result of my workings amounted as yet simply to nothing. How then could I believe in my strength when there was as yet no merit to see it in? Ever did this agitating yet, as I now perceive, quite frivolous question remain to me insoluble? Hast thou a certain faculty, a certain word, such even as the most have not, or art thou the completest dullard of these modern times? Like he's questioning like things like about himself. That have been like prescribed to himself, but like he said he doesn't see it, he can't see it. So I was like, maybe that like, is he in a way an empiricist?
Okay,
in his thinking?
Okay, that he needs to be able to perceive the goodness.
Right.
Maybe. It's funny. I'd never made that connection before, or actually thought about that really before. So I can't really answer your question yes or no. But it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. I know when I read that like for the first time, it just raised question like he seemed, especially during this part, I think this part of Everlasting No, when he's questioning a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean,
he seemed more like an empiricist, like Stratton basically defense.
Yeah, and I think like English philosophers in general tended more towards empiricism than rationalism.
Right.
So again, I think there is probably at least some residual influence there. But it's. I mean, now you're gonna have me thinking. You're gonna have me like going through looking for empiricist influence in Carlyle, and I really don't want to be doing that because I don't have time. There's so much other shit I need to do. It's okay. It's really okay. No, it's good that you're having ideas about this.